slide, please. A quick aside, this is the quintessential proud Indian family portrait taken at graduation time. In my case, this is with my father, my mother, my younger sister, and this is actually my MBA graduation from the Harvard Business School in 2007. Sadly, Facebook hadn't been invented when I graduated from college. In fact, the internet had barely been invented at that time. So there's absolutely no digital record of a family graduation picture or anything else. However, had I had the opportunity to share that, I will tell you, as an international student who did both her undergraduate and graduate education in the United States, I would have preferred to share my Smith College graduation photograph, not just because I am so proud of having attended the largest women's college in the United States, but also because college is quite simply more fun than graduate school and the foundation for everything that comes later in life. And so that was definitely the most significant part of my 14 years living in the United States. Just a quick professional background before I move on. I spent 7 years working in the United States and another 7 years in India. I have worked across hospital consulting, pharmaceuticals, brand consulting, software development, and a primary role that I had at each of these companies and in each of these roles was to interview freshly minted college graduates as prospective employees, induct them into our companies, train them, mentor them early in their career paths. And it was really my love of doing all of those things that led to this business at the Collegiate Path. Another big motivator for me, especially since coming back to India, my home country, is that we have a great belief that our demographic dividend is going to pay off in uplifting millions out of poverty and solving some of the biggest problems of our time. And I am firmly convinced, based on my personal, educational, and my professional experience, that a liberal arts education, which is one that is has been perfected by the US over centuries, is arguably the best possible foundation for our young people who are going out into the workplace and into the world. And so this was really part of the philosophy behind starting our company. Why are we here today? Well, we are here today because Amanda and I have been in many conversations with anxious parents talking about the entirely unprecedented situation that the entire world is in. There have been a number of concerns coming our way, everything from the sheer geographic distance. Suddenly the United States seems really on the opposite end of the world, and it's a source of anxiety. So we've had questions from parents saying, it's not our first choice, but should we be considering the United Kingdom or Singapore instead? Parents have been hearing stories about students getting stuck. So either in the US and being unable to return home, or being stuck in their home countries and being unable to return back to the United States for promising summer job opportunities. There are a number of questions about how the current situation and the US government's response might change admissions prospects or job opportunities for students who hold international passports in the United States. And finally, the very obvious concern around costs, because financial markets the world over have been hit badly, and this is also now a growing cause for concern. Next slide, please. A couple of caveats before we proceed with the presentation today. One is that we do not have a crystal ball. What we will be sharing with you from our two companies is our best reading of the situation as on today's date, but we are unable to predict with any certainty actions that individual governments might take, actions that individual colleges and universities might take, as well as the length of the pandemic. So much remains to be seen. The second caveat I'd like to share is that because the majority of our work at the Collegiate Path is with Indian students, we are using India as a deep dive case study on a couple of slides, but really the takeaways are universally applicable for other geographies around the world. Next slide, please. So I start with Indians, but this is true of every country where there has been a surge in income levels and a surge in aspirations, that unfortunately the higher education offerings in many countries have not kept pace. And so the reality is, no matter the severity of the crisis and no matter the concerns we are hearing, Indians will continue to go abroad for lack of sufficient quality options at home. And this is true of India, and this may be true of other geographies on the call. And we're eager to hear from you if there are individual country circumstances that you'd like to share in the Q&A section today. Next slide, please. I just wanted to share some of the numbers. These are the latest numbers from the United Nations, which is from 2017, just to give you a sense that outbound students from India, this number from 2017 is a little over 300,000. The number is actually upwards of 400,000 for the last year. Half of that exodus of Indian students heads to the United States. So that number of 142,000 on the screen right now is actually upwards of 200,000 already for the past academic year. And this literally dwarfs the next country, Australia, which is at about the number. So the United States, Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, and Germany top out as geographies of choice for Indians going overseas. This is unlikely to change anytime soon. Next slide, please. So why are we still talking about uncertainty when it comes to the United States? We will talk about first the pros, which I will walk you through, and then Amanda will come back and discuss some of the cons. Next slide, please. And I'd like to start with the pros. And the good news is the pros that you see articulated on this slide remain very much the same from my time for my undergraduate education. And this is why we are so biased and bullish about the promise of this degree pathway. The first is that the liberal arts philosophy of American college education really stands apart from the rest of the world. Amanda will be talking later about comparison with other geographies in terms of philosophy. But the principle is quite simply that you are not only required to study your specialization, but also broaden your understanding of other subjects and a view of the world beyond your specialization, such that you only actually decide on your specialization at the end of your second year in college. So the flexibility, innovation, and educational freedom are immense. And I would argue my own career has borne this out, as well as that of several of our students, which is that this is arguably the best possible preparation for jobs of the future and for ensuring career agility. And I need to point to no other indicator other than the United States remains a quarter of the world economy. The rest of the world looks to it continually for innovation, especially the kind of innovation that comes at the intersection of different disciplines, which is honestly the need of the hour, not just in our current pandemic, but also when one is looking at issues around climate change and global inequality and many other significant challenges. The second is the marketability of the degree. Certainly within the United States, there is a perceived ranking of institutions, but the good news is, looked at on a global scale, the United States has literally tens of institutions in all of the top lists. And there is really incredible marketability of that degree in home geographies. And this is borne out by students who have elected to come back to India and found that their US degrees and that liberal arts stamp has really afforded them some of the most premier career opportunities back home. Third is institutional resources. And I can argue about the physical infrastructure, the labs, the libraries, the observatories, which really are incredibly well endowed. But one thing that I feel a special connection with, having moved back to India in 2008, is the power of the partnerships and alumni networks that US institutions have globally. As I continue to make my life in India, I can tell you that alumni networks, both for my undergraduate college and my graduate university, are alive and well, and have not only brought professional opportunities my way, but prospects for continuous professional development. and social networking. And this is really something that the United States takes very seriously. Institutions work very hard at it. And this is a huge lifetime value of that 4-year undergraduate degree. Fourth is the concept of holistic admissions and the fact that there are hundreds of quality options in the United States. In countries like India in particular, the candidacy in the eyes of Indian institutions is that graduating 12th graders will be seen really only on the basis of their school leaving exam results. And I don't need to point to statistics to just show you how aggressive some of those cutoff requirements are. This is true in many other geographies as well. So although the United States has an admittedly more arduous admissions process, the point of it is that they assess a candidate's full candidacy and totality of potential contribution instead of just reducing their candidacy to final percentages. And finally, the US government, through its F1 student visa program, allows for OPT. OPT stands for Optional Practical Training. There is a philosophy that in addition to the classroom learning that students get through their degree pathways, they should also have access to job opportunities so that they can actually have real world application of what they've learned in the classroom. This can be 1 year in non-STEM degrees or 3 years in the case of STEM majors. And it is interesting, we're even seeing that economics now has STEM accreditation to enable students to actually spend a full 3 years after they graduate from college working in the United States. And this is obviously a pathway to future graduate study and or future work experience. Next slide, please. You can see this in the numbers. So undergraduate numbers for India. So this is India specific. As I said, I'm using India as a case study, but you can see in 4 years alone between the academic year 2013-2014 and 2017-2018, the India outbound numbers doubled. So Indians are catching on to the value of this education and this pathway. Numbers went from 100,000 to 200,000 in 4 short years. And you can see that the number of Indian students going now for undergraduate study is steadily increasing. If you were to compare this, for instance, with the China numbers, China sends more undergraduate students than graduate students currently to the United States. And this trend, as you can see, where graduate numbers are decreasing, but undergraduate numbers are climbing, is likely to continue in the case of India and other countries. Next slide, please. I'd like you to also think about the numbers from the opposite standpoint. $8 billion is the economic impact of Indian students in the United States in 2018. This is US government data, and this is nothing to sneeze at. Most of the students who come from overseas into the United States, a majority of the funding to fund their education in the United States comes from overseas. And this is a huge value add for the US economy, and one that is likely to be in consideration as governments enact policies. Next slide, please. And so here is the reality, that for full pay international students, the US is seeking you just as much as you might be seeking them. And the reason international students are necessary for US colleges to both survive financially and to thrive is not just the financials, right? It is also that they are seeking a diversity of students on their campuses. And they're seeking academic excellence, and they look for that in their international student populations. And this is a huge plus for why the United States is still very open to attracting the best and brightest from around the world. Next slide, please. I'm going to end my section on this slide. I want to talk a little bit about how this year's experience for applicants might be different from even the batch that is currently graduating. There are 2 worrying trends that we would like to talk about. One is that many of the students who are graduating this year from high school and already have offers of admission in hand might consider taking a gap year. and defer their admission or reapply next year, in light of the fact that in all likelihood, the first semester of their college experience is likely to be online. And so for some, the cost calculus of paying high tuition and not having the on-campus experience means that they might defer their decision. And it means that this year's applicants, therefore, will have some of the spots already filled when it's their turn to apply to top colleges and universities in the United States. The second is that the standardized test boards, the College Board and the ACT, which run the standardized tests required of US college applications, have had multiple cancellations. Several of the board examinations held across countries have also been canceled or postponed. And this has just caused another layer of stress for a lot of the students who are entering 12th this year. On the flip side, there are growing estimates that the numbers of Chinese students and maybe even more broadly East Asian students is likely to drop in light of the political climate in the United States and bilateral relations. This could, in fact, oddly boost chances for students from other geographies applying to the United States this year. And finally, again, in an unprecedented move, several US colleges and universities are actually considering relaxing or entirely waiving their SAT and ACT standardized testing requirements for this year only, in light of the fact that for so many students in international geographies, it's going to be more difficult to come by testing dates and testing centers. So I will end here and turn it over to my partner, Amanda, who will walk us through some of the points of comparison for you to consider to the United States.
Hello, everybody. I'm Amanda. And I also don't have a digital memory of my college experience, but someone did post this one on Facebook, and that wild woman with hair everywhere is me. It's probably an appropriate photo because my hair used to be everywhere anyway, and I did spend an awful lot of my college career on rowing for Yale on the water. So there we go. Next slide, please. Oh, one thing I wanted to say, actually, can we go back to the Yale slide? Because I forgot something very important. I really loved my experience so much that when I moved to India 12 years ago, I started doing admissions interviews for Yale and I really wanted to make sure that the next group of alumni were as wonderful as the ones that I had attended school with. And this was actually also how I got into this college admission work, because I just met so many amazing kids, and I realized that in India there wasn't always a lot of guidance, and so many of these students were not necessarily representing themselves well, I realized on their applications. And additionally, they weren't familiar with the difference, say, between the United States as a geography for education versus other areas. And because I liked these kids so much, I would offer my assistance, and I ended up helping them so often. I realized that it would be helpful to convert to helping full time. So now this is what I'm doing with Meghna. Now we can go to the next slide. So I'm definitely pro-US, but there are definitely some cons. And so we'll just go over them. For students who know exactly what they want to study, if you know that you want to study economics and there is no question about it and you want to be an economist, it's much faster to do a UK degree or a Singapore degree where you can get through in 3 years as opposed to the 4 years required for American style liberal arts education. This puts you into your career track just a year faster. And it's also one less year of college that your family is paying for. One thing to be aware, many of our Indian students think about doing their undergraduate in India and then doing postgrad in the United States. There is an issue that most US graduate programs require 4 years of undergraduate study. So many of these students end up having to do a 4th year anyway through a 1-year master's program. So just something to be aware of. The next biggest con is the cost, particularly when you look on paper, the US education is expensive. You get a lot for that money, but it's the highest priced education there, and there's no two ways around that. The yearly cost is going to, the 4-year cost is going to be between 140,000 and 300,000 US. This is including room and board. However, there are scholarships available for international students and financial aid at certain universities available for international students. So you can apply strategically to help mitigate those costs. The other thing is that when you look at entry-level salaries coming out of the US versus other geographies, the US salaries can be quite high, and this also can help mitigate the overall cost when you consider that, factor that in. Far from home, really any international university is going to be far from home. One thing that the US does offer that other geographies that do not is smaller colleges with nurturing environments. The United States has many, many liberal arts colleges. So these are colleges that have generally 5,000 or fewer students and provide, because they're small, provide close interaction between professors and students. Students end up being able to be mentored. They have opportunities to do research with them. They really know their peers well and have a wonderful community. What that does is create a sort of a village experience, which is very safe. And we're going to hear a little bit from a student who will tell you what it's been like. United States also has lots of large universities, which will be more equivalent to what you'd find in the UK or Australia, massive ones with tens of thousands of students. And those ones you have to be a little more independent. Con of the US is the intense application process. And Meghna explained that. This year, some of the testing requirements are going to be relaxed because of COVID-19, so it's something to consider. And lastly, this path to residency in the United States, which used to be something that students could count on, is no longer so easy. So there is optional practical training, but if you only have 1 year, certain companies don't want to invest the effort to train you for 1 year. A lot of students will use that for research or smaller companies that will take them. If you have a STEM major, you have a better shot because you have a 3 years of OPT. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to compare. I've spoken a little bit about other geographies in comparison to the US, but we're going to go through a little more carefully. So next slide. Okay, so first, just so you can have some idea of numbers, these are 2 years old, but you can see how many students are picking the UK, which is another favored geography. Next slide. And Canada, which is grown more and more as a popular destination, particularly as geopolitics shift. Canada has grown more and more popular in the last couple of years, especially. Next slide. Okay, so here's a side-by-side. So we've talked about the USA, and I'm just going to remind you. So the great thing about US is flexible liberal arts education. You don't actually have to know what you want to be when you grow up and when you enter. And most 17-year-olds don't. So they just have limited exposure and limited understanding of even what opportunities are out there. The US allows them to do 2 years of classes before they actually fully commit to one area. This allows them to have actually a much more nuanced experience in terms of their education. There are hundreds of quality institutions. USA is the only place to find large numbers of nurturing liberal arts colleges. The degree is highly marketable. What Meghna talked about, the institutional resources and alumni networks, this is one of the huge benefits. While you're in the institution, I mean, many of these are well funded by their alumni, They're quite wealthy, and these networks go on to support the students throughout their lives. So all of us on this call have utilized our alumni networks tremendously, and we are definitely at an advantage for the schools that we went to. Holistic admissions, which Meghna explained, and US work experience. The cons, as I just said, the price tag, the difficult application process, you're in school for 4 years versus 3 years, and the US has an unclear residency pathway. I'm going to skip Canada right now and go to the UK, which is also, the system in the UK is also the same system that is in Australia and Singapore and in most of Europe. So Singapore and Australia certainly modeled themselves on UK institutions, so they follow that. And India as well. So again, for the pros, it's a 3-year program for specialized degrees. So if you are highly directed, that is a big pro, that you can be in the marketplace sooner and you spend one less year in your program. Degrees are highly marketable. UK has a more direct pathway to work and residency, as do some of these other locations. Essentially, many of them have merit-based immigration. So with your college degree and a job, you can establish residency in most of these places. And greater affordability than the US for these degrees. Cons. So as I said, little educational flexibility. Whatever course you take, you're in. We have students come to us every year because they realize halfway through they're in the wrong course, but there's nothing they can do about it. They have to figure out other ways to gain experience in the area that they're interested in. Otherwise, they have to start over. When you're in a highly specialized degree program, your job opportunities are restricted to that very specialized area. So you have less flexibility on the other side. So it's great if you know exactly what you want to do. It's not so great if you're just trying to figure it out while you're there. These other geographies don't do alumni networks, with the exception of Oxford and Cambridge. So this is just not something that's promoted or supported by the institution. So this is something that's very much a US quality for education that doesn't exist in other venues. The UK does not have money for outside money for scholarships. There are only a very minimal number of scholarships available to study in the UK. It's very competitive and hard to get them. If you want to do your graduate degree in the US, you might have to do a 1-year master's. If you're working, if you decide that UK is where you want to establish your residency, there is a question about what's going to happen with Brexit happening. So many of the industries that were primary in the UK because they were the center of Europe are now shifting. So it's just something to watch out for. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And the last thing is that there are primarily large impersonal institutions. You don't get that nurturing mentorship that you get in the US. Canada is in the middle because it's somewhere in the middle. It's very close geographically to the US, and it offers, from school to school can vary, but generally a hybrid style liberal arts curriculum, meaning it's a 4-year program. You usually do 1 year of general ed, where you take a variety of classes, a little more like the US, but then you go into your specialization. Now, schools can vary somewhat about how specialized or how more liberal artsy they are. So this is something to investigate each school. The Canadian schools are also very well reputed and have a strong marketability. Canada has a much simpler pathway to work and residency than the US. They're more affordable. The price for a year in Canada is less than the price for a year at most United States institutions. And because they're 4-year programs, you have direct entry into US graduate programs. The cons, again, limited alumni networks, very few small school options, mostly giant impersonal universities. And Canada as a choice for residency, it's just a smaller country, well, not physically, but in terms of population. And the economy is smaller for that reason than US. So more limited market and career prospects. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I think just to cap off what Meghna and I have been talking about, we actually have a student who just wants to quickly tell you about what his experience has been in a liberal arts college. This student came to us. He was planning on studying engineering in India, and his board exams didn't go as well as he had hoped, and he was just devastated because he couldn't get a quality seat in India. So he came to us during his gap year. What can he do? How can he study engineering? And the US was the answer because there's so many quality programs again. He ended up with multiple options, and he ended up choosing a smaller liberal arts college called Redlands that has a 3+2 engineering program with Columbia University. So basically, the idea is he do 3 years at Redlands, and then he would spend the next 2 years guaranteed, if his GPA was at a certain level, at Columbia University, and end up with a degree in engineering from an Ivy League school. So this is the pathway he took. After 1 year, he decided engineering really wasn't for him, and he switched to math and computer science, and he has just thrived. We just are so happy hearing from him. So we asked him to tell about his experience. So next slide, please. Okay, a quick video. Oh, do we have sound? Okay, I don't think we have sound. I was wondering if I just couldn't hear him. That's unfortunate. Let's just give 1 minute to see if we can fix the sound, and then we'll skip it if it doesn't work.
And I'm from Mumbai, India.
Oh.
The reason I came to the US for my undergrad education was because of the opportunities I'd be getting over here. For example, the freedom of choosing my own classes, being involved on campus, and having that connection with my professors. And those factors have turned out to be true. For example, I was due to the freedom of choosing my own classes, I was able to customize all my semesters based on my interest, my comfort level, my experience. I've been involved on campus a lot in the math club, the international student organization, and outdoor programs. In outdoor programs, you get to explore the outdoors experience of the Southern California, where you get to backpack, rock climb, trek, hike, surf, and all those all more fun things. And thanks to the small classroom sizes, I was able to have a great connection with my professors. I was not afraid to ask questions, and they were really nice about it. They also encourage you to go to their office hours and understand more about the concepts, which really speaks to the fact that they want you to succeed in classes. And it creates a nice and interesting situation where you don't have to do well in those classes, but you want to do well in those classes. Thanks to the great connections that I made with my professors, I was able to. I was invited to Thanksgiving dinners at their houses. I remember I went to a restaurant for lunch with my professor right after an exam with a bunch of other students, which was really nice. Given the situation that we are in right now, the university has been kind enough to house all international students on campus, because some of us can't go back home, and even though the campus was evacuated and all students have been sent home, the university has kept us in a nice quarantine environment inside apartments, which really speaks to the fact that they care about you and they're committed towards you, even though you are a small part of the campus population, like just 5%. They want you to know that they are there for you, and they're really great about it. So thank you.
Okay, next. Next slide. All right, I'm going to turn over to our partners, LCR, to talk to you about visas. So, Suresh.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Meghna. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I appreciate all making the time to join us today. Registrations for this webinar were higher than we expected, so I do hope that you find this information timely and useful. My name is Suresh Rajan, and I'm the founder and executive chairman of LCR Capital Partners. Next slide, please. I'm not sure who actually convinced me of putting this in here, but this dynamic duo is a picture of me and one of my LCR partners, Rogelio Caceres. This was, unlike Megna, this was one of our first days at Harvard Business School back in 1995. I think it was actually taken at an orientation event before classes even started. And as you can tell, time has not been very kind. Next slide quickly. A little bit about LCR Capital. We're a private investment firm with advisory services based in Westport, Connecticut, in the United States, just about an hour outside of New York City. We have offices in Miami, Sao Paulo, Dubai, Mumbai, and most recently in Singapore. We specialize in esoteric investing and advisory services, and we'll get into the details a bit later in the presentation. But at our core, we are industry leaders in investment immigration, helping global families leverage a U.S. government immigration program known as EB-5 to invest in American businesses or real estate projects in exchange for a U.S. green card for that investor, their spouse, and their family. Historically, about 90% of EB-5 investors were from mainland China. LCR took a very different approach to developing its business, and our nearly 1,000 clients are from over 30 countries, and about half of them are from India itself. Next slide, please. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. That statement was made by Nelson Mandela during a speech at a Boston, Massachusetts high school back in June of 1990. I've had good fortune in my life, such that I've never had to consider education as a weapon. My father had a different perspective on education. My brothers and I were raised with the view that education was the single best investment one could make in themselves or in others. That was true then. I think it's true now, and I certainly think it's going to be true tomorrow. I suspect and hope that those joining us today will have fortune enough in their lives to view this similarly. Next slide, please. International students in the American dream. Immigrants from India have been leaders in long-established industries with companies like PepsiCo, as well as bleeding edge industries like information technology, with innovative firms and disruptive firms like Google. Importantly, their paths of these leaders started in America as international students. The stories of their American dreams changed the world, and for the better. My own story is far more modest, but it's not one I would alter in any meaningful ways. My family's American dream began decades ago when we immigrated from Kerala, India. My father was a physician who participated in an early green card visa program that facilitated foreign doctors gaining entry to the United States, so long as they settled in areas of the country that needed healthcare providers. After living in different parts of the country, we made the state of Florida our permanent home. It had the weather that was reminiscent of our homes in India. Since my younger years were spent living in a small village in India and small towns in Kansas and Florida, the lure of attending college, living and studying in a global city led me to the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And much to my parents' great disappointment, I chose to study political science and not STEM during my undergrad years. Post-undergrad, I worked in Washington, D.C. For a number of years as an aide to several members of Congress. In the mid-90s, I attended Harvard Business School, and after graduation there, joined McKinsey and Company. Since then, I've been somewhat of a serial entrepreneur, having most recently started LCR Capital in 2012, and have successfully developed it as the leading disruptor in the EB-5 investment industry. Next slide, please. Today's landscape. If I'm honest with myself and candid with all of you, I must admit that I'm not sure my American dream would have played out the way it did if I had to navigate on the current realities facing international students, facing all of you. Across several stages of life, the challenges facing international students and workers are varied and growing, from high school to college to graduate school. Admission rates for international students are declining, tuition rates are going up, financing options and merit-based scholarships are more and more difficult to obtain. Then the challenges after graduation. Sponsorships for OPT are becoming harder to find. H-1B visas are awarded on a lottery basis. Imagine a life of hard work and your futures are governed by chance. And this was all pre-COVID-19. Next slide, please. In the era of COVID, a bad situation has become worse for international students and those seeking professional opportunities in the United States. Coming into this year, unemployment in the United States was at a historic low of 3.7%. In the last 7 weeks alone, more than 33 million Americans have filed for unemployment insurance. And this is worse than it was during the Great Depression in the 30s. You've seen these headlines, agencies reviewing visa program to find jobs for Americans. Next Trump immigration target, OPT for international students. Over 200,000 H-1B workers could lose legal status by June. Families and their children the world over are struggling with these new realities, and mine is no different. Most of my family still resides in India, and I have many relatives with the same hopes and dreams as you all do. Next slide. The EB-5 investment program. There is a path to America that's not very well known. It is long established and can address these challenges and new realities with a high degree of certainty. It's called the EB-5 Immigrant Investor Visa. And it's the fastest, most direct method by which one can obtain a US green card, which allows for permanent residency in the United States. And permanent residency puts any immigrant on the similar footing as a US citizen when it comes to educational and professional opportunities. Let me be very clear about that. If you are a permanent resident in the United States, your education and employment opportunities are essentially the same as a US citizen. Very few things a US citizen can do that a permanent resident can't. Vote, serve on a jury, carry a US passport. Otherwise, the opportunities are very much the same. The EB-5 program is nearly 30 years old. It was first established in 1991. It really only became widely leveraged after the 2008 financial crisis. The original intent of the program was to attract wealthy Hong Kong residents before Hong Kong reverted to Chinese control, and that's why it's been predominantly used by Chinese investors. Since its inception, the EB-5 program has helped tens of thousands of global families to immigrate to the US via a green card by investing $900,000 into a qualified project that's approved by USCIS. That's the US Immigration Agency. And those projects are managed by firms like LCR. Investors secure US green cards within 18 to 24 months of investing and typically see a return of their capital between 5 and 8 years of their initial investment. Next slide, please. So how does it work? There's really just a few simple things that need to be addressed in an EB-5 investment. The immigrant investor needs to make an investment of $900,000 with legally sourced funds into an approved job-creating EB-5 project and pass a background check. If the investment creates and sustains a minimum amount of jobs, the investor, their spouse, and all unmarried children under the age of 21 will get a green card. That's the entire family for the single investment of $900,000. Generally speaking, the application process takes 1 to 2 months. Within 2 years of making the investment, the investor will receive a conditional green card. And at the end of 5 years, after demonstrating that the necessary job creation occurred, the conditional status is lifted and the investor and the family have permanent green cards and the initial investment is returned in a couple of years. The conditional status allows you to do anything the permanent status would. But to actually get the permanent status in place, you have to demonstrate that the investment achieved what it was intended to do which for the American program is all about job creation. Next slide, please. EB-5 program is surging in popularity. These are a couple of quotes from leading publications in the US. The Los Angeles Times noted that the EB-5 program is the only visa for which approval numbers have increased during the Trump presidency. That's not an insignificant thing to state about a presidency that's really been defined by limiting immigration. Trump and his family members have availed themselves of the EB-5 program themselves for their own real estate projects in the New York corridor. And he has a great affinity towards immigration programs that are merit-based, and nothing's more merit-based than putting your money where your mouth is. Forbes magazine says that the EB-5 program has become the most popular residency program in the world. Next slide, please. Now, why is this program surging in popularity? Well, it's really because of all of you here today. A full 50% of our clients, their primary reason they do this is for their children, for their education, and for their future work opportunities. They really want to be able to answer or have solutions for the three questions listed here. What's the best way to avail oneself of financial aid or scholarships when tuition costs are exploding, rising much faster than inflation? How can my children best position themselves in the ultra-competitive U.S. admissions process? It's more and more competitive by the day, and that's not just for U.S. students, but for global students looking at U.S. schools. And then how do I make sure that my children have the professional opportunities after school that they've worked so hard for to be able to live and work freely in the United States? The EB-5 visa has very, very meaningful impacts on all of these three questions. As a permanent resident, you do have access to financial aid and scholarships that aren't there for many other international students. You are potentially at a very different position from an admission standpoint. Colleges increasingly are concerned about the employability of their students upon graduation. Those are statistics that schools naturally would want to market themselves against. And international students are having a harder and harder time gaining very consistent and predictable career opportunities. I can go into a lot of detail on all of these, but fortunately, I think I've got a great case study to point to, and that's my partner, Raj Chennai, who runs our practice out of the GCC in our Dubai office. And let me pass it on to him, and he can share with you a little bit about his experience as a U.S. student and immigrant. Raj?
Thanks, Suresh. Much appreciated. Hi, everyone. Thanks for carving out time on your weekend to spend these 90 minutes with us. While all four of us on this panel have come from different walks of life, Amanda, Meghna, Suresh, and I have had the privilege of studying and working in the US, and we hope that by the end of this session, you'll leave with some key takeaways that you find useful in your decision-making journey. On the left, you'll see me as an 18-year-old sophomore at the University of Pennsylvania. On the right, I am back at Penn for my 25-year reunion last May. While hairstyles may have changed, the friendships that began in college have remained intact decades later. The majority of my close friends descended upon Penn's campus from India, Oman, Singapore, and Indonesia. Back in the 90s, they did not have to worry about their visa status. They graduated from college and pursued career opportunities in the US with relative ease. That scenario is now history, and the landscape has shifted significantly. My story is no different. Having been born in Mumbai, my journey from Indian citizenship to being a green card holder and eventually a US citizen has certainly helped pave the way to pursue many important life decisions with greater ease, including college applications, graduate school plans, and of course, US-based career decisions. Next slide, please. As most of you may be aware, the cost of a US education has been increasing at a significant pace in recent decades. And despite the current pandemic, we do not anticipate this changing for the foreseeable future. As this slide shows, according to the Wall Street Journal, the cost of a US college education has grown by 400% since 1990. Next slide, please. Before we go any further, let's first clarify how US colleges define the difference between a domestic applicant versus an international applicant. As this slide demonstrates, taken directly from MIT's admissions website, having US citizenship or permanent residency, also known as a green card, qualifies you as a domestic applicant. All others, regardless of where you live or attend high school, qualifies you as an international applicant. Next slide, please. Driven by significant demand from affluent families from around the world, but especially India, China, and the Gulf region where I'm based, the number of international students at US campuses has hit an all-time high, with over 1.1 million international students at undergrad and graduate programs across the US. This growth trend is likely to continue despite the current environment that we're in. Next slide. This is a representative snapshot of the growth in application volume from over a 15-year period, ranging from 2004 to 2019, at some of the most coveted US colleges. Of the 8 Ivy League schools shown here, Penn experienced the most significant increase in applications, with 146% more candidates applying last year versus in 2004. Other peer schools experienced similar increases, as you can see. It is important to remember that while applications increase, the number of seats at these schools remain the same, thereby creating admissions rates that are often in single digits. Now, I can say with great certainty that if I was applying now, the chances of my acceptance would be pretty much close to 0%. Next slide, please. Now, here are some eye-opening stats clearly demonstrating the delta in admissions outcomes between domestic and international applicants. The percentages displayed at the top represent the admissions rates of US green card holders, whereas the lower percentages at the bottom represent foreign student acceptance rates. Regardless of whether your dream school is displayed here, this scenario applies to all major colleges and universities in the US. As a green card holder, you would be able to mitigate international student quotas and enjoy better outcomes with your college application process, regardless of which college you have your heart set on. Next slide. Now let's transition a little bit away from college admissions and let's talk about another important life milestone, identifying and pursuing one's career aspirations. As this slide demonstrates, it is inherently challenging to secure a position at leading US-based companies, regardless of your visa status. We've selected here a representative list of some leading companies from different sectors, financial services and technology mainly. Goldman Sachs, as you can see, recruits only 4.3% of all applicants, while leading Silicon Valley-based companies like Google and Facebook are significantly lower at 0.5% and 0.3% respectively. Next slide. While securing highly coveted jobs in the US is inherently tough, doing so as an international student is unfortunately tougher, as Suresh alluded to. Many companies have stopped recruiting international students altogether. At Penn, for example, highly sought after employers like Goldman Sachs and McKinsey & Company have stopped recruiting international students 4 to 5 years ago. Absolutely daunting. Under the current administration, we may see this situation only get more challenging. Next slide. There are only 85,000 H-1B visas awarded each year in an annual lottery that is based 100% on luck. Your nationality, college, grade point average, or any other accomplishments simply do not compute into this formula. It is a binary outcome. Many of the families that we work with at LCR have children who were forced to return to India or their home country simply because luck was not on their side. And pursuing a US-based opportunity became an impossibility. Securing the green card enables children to navigate their US-based career plans with greater control and predictability versus leaving the outcome to chance. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite quotes. And before we wrap up the formal part of our presentation and open it up to Q&A, I would like to leave you with this quote by Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO. "You are defined not just by your capabilities, but by the choices you make." Now, whether you're a parent or a college-bound student, all of us on today's panel wish that you make the best choices for your respective futures, not just for your four-year college journey, but for the longer road ahead. In the COVID-19 era, the world will need more young leaders to emerge from all walks of life, all sectors, and indeed all countries. While all of us have unique strengths, capabilities, and talents, and while the right college decision is clearly important, what often paves the way to long-term success is pursuing a career in an environment that embraces lifelong learning, innovation, and leadership. And we believe that this setting is best found in the United States. Deciding on a US green card is clearly a once-in-a-lifetime decision, similar to applying to college. If you are interested in learning more about EB-5 and how we might be able to help, we would welcome the opportunity to meet over a private consultation. Now what we'll do in the remaining time that we have is shift over to a Q&A session. We have received many interesting questions from the audience today, and given the number of folks we have on the webinar, we're going to have limited time to address all the questions. But certainly, what we'll do is I'll cover a few questions that are relevant to LCR, and I'll request Amanda from Collegiate Path to cover those that are more focused on admissions. Let's see. Well, this is a great question. Why was the EB-5 program excluded by the Trump administration from this recent temporary ban on new immigration announced last month, as many of you may have seen in the media? Well, I guess the response to that, from my perspective, is the following. President Trump's affinity for the EB-5 investment program is a long-standing one, as many of you might know, going back to his days as one of the premier real estate developers in New York City. Now, given the program's direct and proven new American job creation capabilities, at no cost to the US, taxpayer as well as extensive security checks, the US CIS makes each investor undergo. The EB-5 investment visa is exactly the type of immigration program that President Trump supports and is likely to continue supporting. Another great question here. My eldest daughter is a rising sophomore at the University of Pennsylvania. I promise I didn't plant that question. We are from Bangalore and she was born here. Is it too late for her to apply for the EB-5 program since she will be graduating in 3 years' time? What about our son? He's just a freshman at TISB, one of the top high schools in Bangalore. Is he too young to apply by himself? A couple of thoughts. Despite the announcement by the Department of State last July that Indian-born principal EB-5 applicants would begin to face additional waiting times, it has been highly encouraging to witness how quickly the overall waiting period has shrunk since then. In fact, Charlie Oppenheim, the Department of State's Chief of Visa Control and Reporting Division, since 1993, he recently estimated that India-born principal applicants would no longer face additional waiting periods once the visa category becomes current by July 2020. So a very positive scenario for all of those who are India-born and looking at this option. Very positive scenario indeed. And the last question that I'll select here before turning it over. So if I would have had a green card by EB-5, would I have been forced to leave my college campus in the current environment and not be able to return? And the answer is no. You would not have been forced to leave your college campus. One of the most, I would say, and I think, I speak for Suresh and the rest of the LCR team, and I think one of the most pleasant experiences that we've been having in recent weeks amidst this crisis that we all face is updates from clients, updates from happy clients, and in some cases, their children, who are absolutely thrilled to have made the decision to invest several years ago and now get to enjoy the safeties and the privileges that the US residency, the US green card provides. So with that, again, I know there's many more questions that I haven't had a chance to address, but we would be happy to do so offline, certainly. And I'll turn this over now to Amanda. Amanda, if you could please take over on the questions that you have selected for Collegiate Path.
Yes, thank you, Raj. So yes, we have a few very good questions. One here that I picked, there's a question about financial aid for financial assistance for international students. And I talked about it a little bit. So let me just clarify that while some schools do have funds for international applicants, and there are very few schools that are need blind, meaning they don't look at whether you can pay or not before they admit you. That's very few schools. Those are basically the richest, wealthiest schools, Yale being one of them, Harvard is one of them. But most schools, while they have some funds, it's a limited amount. So if you're applying for financial aid, it will impact admissions at certain schools because they can only support so many financial aid applicants. There are other schools that just say, no, we do not give financial aid to international students. We only give it to domestic or green cards. So when we're planning lists with our students, we do it very strategically. If they are looking for the funds, if they're not going to be full pay, then we apply very strategically to schools that we know are looking for smart Indian students. And that offers generous merit scholarships. Some of them, there's one school that offers every single international applicant a very large merit scholarship because they're just trying to build up their international reputation. And it's an investment for them. So there are options, but just not as many as if you were a domestic student or a green card holder. Another question, let's see. Do you foresee an uptick in the number of students choosing to remain in India this year? So this question is not totally clear, so I'm going to answer it in two ways. One, it might be our students planning on attending Indian universities rather than go abroad. Some will be, but they're just, as Meghna pointed out, they're just not enough to accommodate all the applicants. So the strong universities in India will even get more competitive, and many students will just not have a place for them, at an Indian institution that they feel comfortable with. And many of them, if that is their choice, they will end up taking a gap year. I don't think that's what's going to happen. At least for our students, they've already have their college plans, and even though this virus has thrown everybody for a loop, they will probably just put up with one semester done online or in some hybrid manner. Maybe not, they won't be actually physically on their university, but then the rest of their college career hopefully will make up for that. And another question. Do you foresee online education becoming a real alternative to traditional classroom learning? Well, I think that all these universities going through this transition of now having to be online will create changes. However, I would say at least half the learning that these students do, or these students get while they're at university, is from their peer groups, from interactions with professor outside the classroom, from other opportunities that exist, clubs, athletics. These things you just can't get from an online classroom. The other thing is for those science students, laboratories, laboratory research. these just cannot be replicated online. So I think that probably online learning will create some shifts, and certain types of classes, could be done that way, or, as an option, but it's absolutely not a replacement for traditional college. It just cannot match up. I think that's the end of my questions that I have here. So one last thing before we go, can we have the next slide? I think we have some. We just want to make sure. Oh, if you want to reach out to us, I'm sorry, we have Meghna and Raj. We have their contact information, so please note it down. It's also available on our respective websites, and please get in touch with us. And then lastly, we do the Collegiate Path. We have an upcoming webinar that focuses strictly on applications, the complex application process for the US that we kept mentioning. And it requires an entire webinar unto itself because it is long and involved. And so we will be doing that on May 23rd. We will be emailing all the attendees here with information about that. Or we'll be posting it on our website as well shortly. And I think I'm going to turn over to Raj because I think he has some information as well.
Thanks, Amanda. This slide effectively captures several upcoming events that we have at LCR. For those of you who are interested in engaging further with us on the EB5 topic, whether it is to understand more about the program itself. Clearly, it's an intricate process. And we are hoping that this will be one of several conversations we'll have with you all in the weeks ahead. We do have also a deeper dive into our specific project, the Hall of Fame Village project in Canton, Ohio, for those of you who might be more advanced in your thought process on the EB5 front. And we invite you to our virtual webinars. We have those every 2 weeks, and we'll certainly be following up with these details over email, since I'm sure it's probably the font is too small for you all to read here. Well, with that, I think we've reached the conclusion of our session. It's been a real pleasure addressing you all today. We like I said, we view today's conversation as a starting point, and really hope to engage in further conversations in the near future. You will receive that email, as I mentioned, with our contact details in case you wish to follow up with questions or need further information from either of us, Collegiate Path or LCR. And from all of us at LCR and Collegiate Path, thank you so much again for spending a part of your weekend with us, and we look forward to reconnecting with you soon. Thank you again.